Hello, everyone, and welcome to Slash Film Daily. Today is Friday, August 9th, 2024. On today's episode of the show, we're going to be talking about Tilman Singer's new movie, Cuckoo, and present interviews with Singer and stars Hunter Schafer and Dan Stevens. My name is Ben Pearson. I am an editor at slashfilm.com, and I'm joined on today's episode by Slash Film editor BJ Colangelo.
Hi, hi, hiya.
All right, BJ, as per usual with these Friday episodes of the show, what we're trying to do here is we're going to get into some general thoughts about this movie and then we'll clearly mark some spoiler stuff. So, like, broadly speaking, before we get into spoilers, what did you think about this movie, Cuckoo?
Hell yeah, freak shit. I was very, very lucky to see Cuckoo at the Overlook Film Festival a few months ago, and I have not stopped thinking about this movie. It is so weird. It is so cool. It is playing with so many different genres and so many different homages to other movies, which I'm just very, very, very obsessed with. Like the way that I'll kind of like fast pitch it at people is that like when it's a horror movie, it feels eh, like this weird amalgamation of like Cronenberg and Argento and even some like Don't Look Now. And then when it gets into like more sci-fi elements, it feels like all those creepy sci-fi films from like the 80s and 90s that like were not for kids but kids could watch them. And then there's also just so much heart in this movie when it feels like it shouldn't be there. There's so much going on here. I love this movie.
Yeah, that's a great pitch. I think all of those things are very, very true. I came away from the movie liking it, even though I feel like I didn't fully get it, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
I feel like it's a movie that you can enjoy on a surface level, which I did, but there's also it feels like a movie that is very, very it has a lot of depth and richness if you're willing to engage with it on that level. Like I feel like people could write thesis papers about this movie and like the symbolism and what different things mean and all that stuff. And I was trying to track all of that in my head as I was watching the movie. I feel like maybe on further rewatches, some of that stuff will settle in a little easier. But just as I'm trying to, like sit there and literally track what's going on and who these people are and why they're doing these things and all of this, it was kind of tough for me to grab a like a full unified theory of this movie, if that makes any sense too. But
Oh, totally. This is definitely a movie that I think benefits from additional watches because there's so much going on. And you're right, it's an incredibly rich text. But what's funny is that it's a rich text thematically, but it's pretty like matter of fact in terms of like what it's about. Like they don't shy away like what's really happening, but the why and the all of that sort of stuff, that's where it gets
mhm.
really interesting.
Yeah. Okay, before we get into spoilers, we have to talk a little bit about the performances in this movie. I have not seen Euphoria, so I'm largely familiar with, or unfamiliar, I should say, with Hunter Schafer as a performer. And I thought she was great. And I was very excited to see what is a new voice to me sort of burst into this genre space. But I know that you've seen Euphoria, BJ, and I assume you have more of a relationship with Hunter's work than I did. So, what did you make of this performance?
Oh yeah. So I love Hunter Schafer on Euphoria. And for those who are wanting to see, some of that work, but they don't want to sit down and dedicate themselves to the entirety of Euphoria, there were two special episodes between season 1 and season 2. And hers is called Fuck Anyone Who's Not a Sea Blob. And it's basically her doing like a therapy session. And she co-wrote the episode as well. So it's basically like an entire hour of just her. And it's incredible. It's very, very good. That I think that's a really great like snapshot of, kind of who this character is on the show without having to watch the whole show. But I'm very familiar with Hunter's work. But something that I even talk about in the interview that you'll hear later is that everything she's done thus far in her career, they've been like these really incredible ensemble pieces. Like she also has a role in The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, the Hunger Games prequel. She's Tigress Snow, which again, ensemble piece. Euphoria, ensemble piece. This is not only her first feature film, but it is also her first like true leading role where she is carrying everything. And she knocked it out of the park as far as I'm concerned. I was so impressed by how much she just threw herself into this character, and in some instances literally threw herself into this character, because Oh, poor Gretchen cannot stop getting hurt in
Yeah.
this movie. But no, she really, really killed it. I think she's one of the most exciting, like, new people in, young Hollywood right now. And as much as I love her on Euphoria, I hope that I don't ever have to see her on a TV screen again, and that they keep putting her in movies because she is so incredible and deserves to be on the biggest screen possible.
Excellent. Yeah, the you're talking about her character getting injured all the time. This is probably not a spoiler because it's part of how the movie is being sold, where like she spends a lot of the movie with a bandage wrapped around her head. So you know that something happens to her early on in the story for her to get to that place. And when that event happens, that I won't say now, there's a shot where her character, where blood is dripping, sort of up her face and into her eye. And I was so, as somebody who hates eye stuff on camera, I was so deeply disturbed by that image. Like there's some pretty gnarly shit that happens in the movie, but that was like the moment where out loud in the theater quietly to myself I was like, oh no, 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 no. As soon as that shot, like that lengthy shot just holds on this blood dripping into the character's eye and like her eyeball actually turning red because all the blood is seeping in there, I was like, oh my god, no, no, no. So yeah, anyway, just wanted to shout out that moment that was extremely visceral for me. Yeah, she was awesome. And then our boy Dan Stevens, like
Ah, praise
this
be.
guy, he absolutely crushed this. It's him in basically doing an impression of oh my god, why am I blanking on his name? The guy from Inglorious Bastards, Quentin Tarantino's dude.
Oh, like Christoph Waltz?
Yes, Christoph Waltz.
Yes.
The voice is very very similar to that, and like uh, I've seen Dan Stevens in so many different capacities before as an actor, like in so many different types of roles, which I love about him. He's really is. You wrote an article that it ranked all the freaky little weirdos that he's played. That people will probably be able to read by the time they're listening to this episode. So I encourage people to go to Slash Film and check that out because it's a great piece. But he has shown so much range for a guy, and you mentioned this in the article, which is why it's like top of mind for me. He's one of those classic character actors who has the leading man good looks and very easily could have slotted into that particular lane as a performer in his career, but instead he's chosen to take the way more interesting path, and the breadth of different characters and character types that he's played over the years is pretty astounding. And this is just off in an entirely new ballpark for him. I've never seen him do anything quite like this, and he's great at it. It's just he's so much fun to watch, especially in this part.
Oh yeah, I'm obsessed with him in this role. I mean, he's had such a great year playing little freaks, between Abigail, Godzilla, X Kong, The New Empire, and now Cuckoo. Like, he's clearly having the time of his life and having fun, but he's so committed to playing these characters. He finds the truth in how, no matter how weird, how violent, how just off-putting the character is, he makes it truthful. He makes it honest. I never feel like he's winking at the camera. Like, it's in the trailer, so it's not a spoiler, but like, he plays a little pan flute throughout this, like
Yes.
menacing pan flute, like an evil Willy Wonka. And yet when you watch it, like, you laugh because it's uncomfortable, not because you're like, haha, what a funny bit. It's just like, oh my god, this guy is bonkers. What the
Yeah.
hell?
And he's like he feels dangerous too, you know? It's not like you're just laughing at him because he's not a threat. He actually does feel threatening even though he's doing something that like on the surface seems ridiculous and kind of cheesy, you know? So he strikes that balance really really well in this movie. So okay, I think that's probably all we should say before we can get into some spoilery stuff. But okay, so if you've not seen Cuckoo, check it out. I encourage people to watch it. We decided to talk about this movie instead of thinking about Borderlands or God, there was another big movie that came out this weekend. What
It
was
ends
it?
with us.
Oh yeah, it ends with us. Yes, and I feel like we made the proper choice devoting an episode to Cuckoo. So
Yeah, I would
um,
much rather talk about a movie that I had so much fun with rather than just come on here and be like, so you know that Borderlands sucks? There's like
right.
75 podcasts doing that right now. You don't need us to do it either.
Right, right. So, okay, so spoilers for Cuckoo going forward. BJ, you mentioned it at the top of our conversation, but I was not expecting how odd this movie really is with its main plot points and like the fact that it dips into that sci-fi realm And you mentioned it in the headline of your review, which is another great piece of writing, by the way. And
Oh,
I'll
thank you.
link to that in the show notes so people can read that. It's one of my favorite reviews that you've written in a long time. But yeah, like the science fiction aspect of this movie is not really explained in any sort of meaningful way. And you've mentioned this in some of your writing about this film, that Tilman Singer kind of throws logic out of the window a little bit in this movie. And I think this is a good example of a film where I don't necessarily need everything spelled out and the characters to act in a certain way, because the whole film kind of feels eerie and off kilter in a way.
Mhm.
Whereas something like M. Night Shyamalan's Trap, which I talked about with the other guys on the podcast not too long ago. Have you seen Trap yet?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. So part of my issue, and I'm curious where you land on this, was that I thought that the movie kind of asked us to invest in the logical reality of the killer's scenario and then just kind of hand waved away a bunch of scenarios because they were convenient for the plot, or like things that I feel like the movie wanted to have it both ways, Trap. Whereas with Cuckoo, I feel like it's on the same level the whole time, and I'm just kind of it chose a lane and it stuck with it the whole time. Whereas Trap, I feel like it was bouncing back and forth between two things. But I wonder where you landed on Trap, and without getting into spoilers, really for that movie, just like the way that that film treats the logical leaps and stuff like that. Like, did that bother you at all, or were you just on board for what Shyamalan was doing there?
Oh, I'm always on board for whatever kind of madness Shyamalan is gonna throw at me. If he's like, "You know what? You thought we were gonna zig and now we're gonna zag," I'm gonna go, "Alright, sick, I'm on board, let's go." Like, I just
Okay.
don't think about it, which I know is it sounds like a cop out to be like, "Oh, just turn your brain off." Like, I don't turn my brain off when I'm watching his movies, but I accept going into it, like, there's gonna be some logic that's gonna be a little whack, and I just fine. Like, I know what I'm getting myself in for. It's the same thing how I felt like with Old. It's why I love movies like The Happening. Like, he has such a B movie charm to what he's doing, and none of those movies make sense either. So I'm like, I'm not going to get hung up on it. Whereas I think in Cuckoo, it establishes from the very beginning, like, we are not dealing with like logical reality. There is going to be some stuff here that defies all reason and science, and either you're on board with it or you're not.
Mhm.
And I kind of love the audacity uh,
Yeah.
because we're in spoiler territory, yeah?
Hmm.
It's bird people. Like, it's fucking bird people. Like, that isn't possible. Like, I know, like, logistically, you can't make that happen. I don't care. Like, it's
Yeah.
scary. The woman in the hood, or the hooded woman, whatever they call her, is so scary and so upsetting. The sound she makes is a nightmare. And like, I hear it in my head and it scares the hell out of me. And it's like, if I got hung up on like, well, humans actually can't be spliced with birds because of blah blah blah, I don't care.
Right.
Neil deGrasse Tyson can go bitch about that somewhere else. That's not for me.
Yeah, that's exactly the point I'm trying to make. I'm trying to distinguish between the way that these two projects operate, just to sort of hopefully have like give people some insight into where I'm coming from and my reaction there. So anyway, I don't mean to like try to compare this to Trap on any other level, but just trying to use it as a way to illustrate the way that these two movies deal with the logic. And I feel like this one strikes the proper balance for an effective way to tell the story that it's trying to tell, is what I was trying to get at. So
Oh,
um,
totally. Because I think Shyamalan is somebody who's way more interested in the swerve, whereas Singer is somebody who's like, "Welcome to Weirdsville, minute one."
yeah, yeah, exactly. And there really is like so much weird stuff in this movie. And the hooded woman, that's another thing where like it was incredibly scary. The scene where Gretchen's that character is riding the bike, and the hooded woman is sprinting after her and almost catching her, and she sees the shadow and
That
the lights
shadow
and stuff.
play, how has no one done that before? It's genius.
Yeah, so good. And just like the idea, before you even really understand the entirety of what's going on in the movie, just the idea of somebody coming for you like that and like honing in on you and choosing you for some reason that you don't really understand. There's like a Terminator quality to that, right? Of like, this thing is coming after you and it won't stop ever. And you're like, why? Like, stop coming. I don't even know what you want to do to me, but just like stop getting in my space, you know? And like, there's something so primal about that I think works really well in this movie, even when you learn a little bit more of the lore and the mythology and stuff like that as the film goes on, and you get like close-ups of this hooded woman, whereas like in the first part of the movie, maybe even the first half of the movie, it's just kind of like she's in shadows to a degree, and you don't really see, you see some red eyes and stuff like that, but you don't really get the full treatment of that character. But you do by the end when they're in the whatever that room is in that hospital where they're where she's like basically hunting Gretchen's character down. And so I think some people might get the feeling of like, oh, if this character works better the less you show them. But I don't know, there's something so unnerving about the performance and the design of that character where I was still kind of like freaked out by that character, even though we see them in full light and full form and all that, by the end of the movie. So I was wondering what you thought about that and how the movie treated that and whether it was like effectively scary for you the more you see that character.
Oh, she scared the shit out of me, and, like, even after seeing her in full light, I was like, "I don't ever wanna see that again," because it's so upsetting, because there's definitely some uncanny valley stuff going on with, like, the way that her mouth moves and the way that she just moves in general,
Mhm.
but also, I'm not afraid of birds, like, I'm not somebody who's gonna, like, run away from birds, but when I was a kid, I got a little too close to a nest, and I got my ass kicked by a bird, and so I have experienced firsthand like how intense birds will come at you if they feel like you are threatening their kid. And so once I saw her, I was like, no, she's gonna keep coming and she's gonna be relentless and this is gonna be really creepy and like it tapped into something that made me so uncomfortable. And I love the design of her because I think there is another world where like she's like a beaked woman and covered in feathers and it's like not doing that was so much smarter, I think.
Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was thinking the same thing too. Um, so I wanted to. There's like a point of curiosity that I have about this movie. I sort of get the uh, larger plan of what Dan Stevens is trying to do, but I was wondering if you had a sense of what exactly these bird women are doing with the sort of slimy hand thing. Like it's pretty clear that they're jamming their hand up in themselves to the wrist, but were you able to glean what that was going to actually accomplish if they touched a human victim, or is that like trying to think about this even too hard?
So I am not like a bird expert. I'm not like an avian expert by any stretch of the imagination. But I feel like there is something with like it's kind of like how birds mark their territory in some ways
Mm.
where they just kind of barf on them. I mean that's also how they like feed is they regurgitate. Like that's very common how they feed their babies.
Mhm.
And so I think that's what was going on, but like I it's just gross and weird and
Yeah.
I don't wanna think about
Okay.
it.
Fair enough, fair enough. Um, I wanted to highlight one moment too. Like, we're talking about the sort of weirdness that permeates this movie, but there's some really great, like you mentioned, heart and just like human stuff in this film that I thought was really exceptionally well done. Especially the moment where Gretchen learns that her father has sold the house back home, this place that she's been yearning to go and is built up in her mind as like the only escape from this current situation that she finds herself in out in the Bavarian Alps or wherever she is in Germany. And that scene where she learns the truth of what happened and she like gets the box of her mom's old effects and stuff like that that's been like forwarded to this remote resort where they are out in Germany. I just thought was like really, really well done and just an exceedingly normal moment in a movie that is not very normal. So I wanted to highlight that. But do you have any other like either normal or or weird moments that jumped out to you that you wanted to highlight here?
I love as far as, like, normal, I love the fact that she does develop this, like, really beautiful relationship with her half sister, um, somebody who she very much was, like, not a fan of and wanted nothing to do with, and now is like, "No, no, no, I have to protect her." I really love that. I love when movies, provide sibling relationships,
Hmm.
especially ones that were previously strained. As far as, like, weird stuff is concerned, the entire scene where there's the couple in the cabin and
Oh yeah.
like, what a nightmare. Like, it's so great, but it is so upsetting, and that's where, like, the very, now famous image of the woman blow drying her hair on the bed screaming comes from. That whole scene is nuts and makes me like it's really the sound design of anything. And, when people listen to my interview, I asked Tilman Singer about, that screech because the way that it fluctuates between sounding like it is directly like in your face versus like swarming around you. Like
Mhm.
it constantly kept me on edge, and it's such an effective sound.
Yeah, incredible stuff there. All right, the last question I have before we get into some of these interviews is at the very end of the movie when the sisters have been rescued and they're being driven away. Like one of the last shots of the film is Alma's ear twitches at the very end. And my understanding was when that happened earlier in the film, indicator that the mother Cuckoo or whatever you want to call her, the hooded woman, the weird mother bird woman, was kind of nearby, but she's obviously been killed at that point in the story. So I was wondering if you think there's any particular meaning we're supposed to get from that ear twitch, or if that was just kind of a fun movie thing, and I'm not supposed to think that hard about it, or I don't know. Did you clock that at all?
The way that I was looking at it is that, all of these bird women, bird kids, bird people, they're related. There's lineage to it. Like there's something about Alma that she's not that's part of her. That's part of her genetic at this point. So I think this was the sign of like, yes, the mother is gone, but now she is like an independent cuckoo bird on her own. And
Mhm.
so like that bird part of her, like it's not like vampire rules. It's not like the bird was destroyed, therefore she's no longer a bird. Like no,
Yeah.
she still has that in her, and that's the reminder to the audience of, yeah, they escaped, but she's still a fucking bird.
Yeah, and just like another visual piece of visual storytelling that I wanted to praise real quick. As they're leaving that hospital, Gretchen tries to go out the front door, and the door is locked. And Alma just opens the door next to her and just like walks out very easily. And I just thought that was like a really nice visual metaphor, I guess, of like the fact that Alma has gone through some really traumatic stuff, but like she maybe is so young that she's going to be okay, or she is maybe a little more self-actualized and is going to be okay, and Gretchen still has some obstacles to overcome in her life, but she's like on the way, and just that things are going to be maybe a little smoother for Alma than we thought as an audience, because there's a world
Hmm.
in which that character could be so messed up by the events of what happened in this movie that the film ends on a note where it feels like a tragedy, even though they escape. You're just like, oh God, I feel so bad for these characters, and there's no way that this little girl is ever going to be okay. But I feel like the way that Tilman Singer staged that scene, that exit from the building, was just like a little hint to us that Alma's going to be okay, which is
Yeah.
just a really nice piece of filmmaking.
Yeah, for as wild as this movie is, it does have such a optimistic ending.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned it too in your review, I think, about the fact that Gretchen is just like making out with this woman that she's met like 15 minutes after meeting her. Like that's just such a fun way to tell us a lot about the Gretchen character when we hadn't really known that much about her in the story, or at that point in the story. And then for that relationship to actually, it's very very short in this movie, but it actually sticks around until the end of the film, and like that character comes back and is the one who drives them off to safety. So it was just like a nice piece of I don't know, seeding, I guess, throughout the story here. So
10 cheers for lesbians. We'll get you out of bad situations, y'all. That's the lesson learned here.
awesome. All right, well, let's take a quick break and then we'll be right back. All right, so let's do the Tillman Singer interview first. You already teed this one up pretty well, so let's just dive right into it. Here is BJ's conversation with Tillman Singer.
So, my first question is that Hunter Schafer is so phenomenal as Gretchen to the point that I cannot imagine any other actress playing this role. And I
Agreed.
read that when you were casting this, you were not familiar with Euphoria yet. So, you really
No.
hadn't seen her,
Yeah.
really selling it. So, I would
Yeah.
love to hear about a moment during filming or during a particular scene where you sat back as the director and had that aha moment of, this is exactly who Gretchen was always meant to be.
Well, I knew Hunter was the perfect person to play Gretchen. I knew that before we shot the movie. I could feel how strongly connected she was to the role and is to the role. And but you're right, I didn't know Euphoria when she first got recommended to me. And what was incredible though, because when we started filming, I knew she was absolutely right, and I couldn't already not imagine anybody else for the role. But we had to shoot the whole family house where they move in first, because that was our first location that we had to shoot. And there are some intense emotional scenes in that. So that
Mhm.
meant we had it like an easygoing first day, as you do. You know, everybody get to know each other, and simple shots, stuff like this, simple scenes. But I think on day 2 or 3, she had these crazy emotional scenes, heavy lifting, and honestly, like the emotional sort of linchpin of the entire story with Gretchen's story. And what Hunter was able to let loose there without yet having, the trust of working on it for a week or two was so incredible. So then was when I knew that this is not only going to be good, this is going to be really special. And she brings something special, fundamental to what this movie will be later.
Oh, couldn't agree more. And
Yeah.
so I can't speak to other countries, but at least in
Mm.
America, there's this emergence of conservatives who think that cuck is like the ultimate insult to call another person. And
Yeah.
then you have this film where you have like Eric Koenig who has no problem with cuckoldry, like literal
Uh-huh.
cuckoldry.
Uh-huh.
So I'm very interested to know what fascinates you about turning the nature of cuckoo birds into a horror story for humans.
That's a good question. I'm aware of that, and I think it's in part hilarious. You know how
Mhm.
that is like the biggest insult to, let's face it, like someone's masculinity, right?
Right.
And it speaks volumes about human insecurity.
Mhm.
So I think that's what makes this super attractive as a sort of, I don't know, metaphor to tell a story with. But that's just in part. That wasn't front and center for me, because I don't think there is some strong masculine insecurity in our movie. Um, but, um, but in general, it's when I refamiliarized myself with the process of the cuckoo bird breeding and how they breed and how they put their eggs in the nests of other birds, other bird species, and let them raise their offspring, that like I couldn't let go of this for weeks, and it always came back to me. And then at some point I was sort of like, oh, that's a family drama waiting sort of to be written, right? It's just organically just connected with this sort of lens of an existential horror story, but with some beauty in it. Because in nature, the host parents, they don't abandon nests. They don't
Mhm.
abandon the cuckoo chick that is not theirs. They keep on feeding it. So when that image that just wouldn't leave my mind.
Yeah, I think it's really brilliant. And horror has played with themes of pregnancy and carrying something
Yeah,
monstrous, or
yeah,
but when it comes to raising something,
yeah,
it's almost overwhelmingly, oh, this kid's a demon, or this is
yeah,
Damien, the omen
yeah,
antichrist. So
yeah.
why do you think this sort of subgenre is so unexplored in horror?
Um, that's a good question. I think, why is that unexplored? Well, because it, like raising a child, that's a longer period. That doesn't lend itself to 1.5 hours of movie, I think,
Hmm.
necessarily. Um, so you have to find a way how to tell that in a short amount of time. And I really like telling stories where the time spent telling the story is not longer than a couple of days or a couple of weeks or something. Somehow I always do that. So I had that problem, of how to tell this. So then I came up with, oh, maybe you see these people in 3 different stages, right? As a
Hmm.
child, as a teenager, and as a grown up. In and honestly, also 3 stages of distress and mistreatment, right? Um, I knew that I didn't want it to go do the mother demon child story. I love Rosemary's Baby, and there are great,
Mhm.
great stories
Oh,
like
classics
this.
for a
But
reason, yeah.
yeah, classics for a reason. But it didn't lend itself to sort of that feeling I had in my mind. I really wanted to tell the story about the two siblings that should not get along well, connecting, becoming a union. Um, that I knew from the beginning, sort of like right after that cuckoo metaphor that I found, sort of, or whatever you want to call it, that I thought like, okay, how do I make a human story out of this? I I thought about like from whose perspective do I want to tell this story, and then I was going through the characters, like the natural characters, the host parents, the cuckoo chick, and I was like, okay, that's maybe sort of Rosemary's Baby ish, uh, but then I was like, oh, the most intense and horrific outlook any of these characters could have would be to be a host parent's chick in a nest with a cuckoo egg, because you're gonna get kicked out of the nest. That's what happens in nature. So I went uh, I went at it from that angle. And then I knew that I didn't want it to tell a story where it's just like evil coming in from the outside, has to
Mhm.
be defeated. That's it, right? That's a valid story. That's a valid human fear. But I felt like that cuckoo metaphor, different egg, in like something in your family, that part of where it's already in your family. That's what spoke to me. It's finding out that there are extremely dark places within your family, but there's also potential for light and beauty and union and love. And I wanted to tell a story about that.
And I love that that is such a beautiful aspect of this because I think that speaks to, I think part of why that's unexplored is because there's such a fine line to walk because you don't want to ever look like you're demonizing the idea of like blended families or,
Yeah,
non-blood royal families.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think Cuckoo walks that line like so phenomenally. This was one of my
Thank you.
favorite movies I saw this year. I got to see it at Overlook and I've not stopped thinking about it.
Oh, wonderful. Okay,
So
cool.
absolutely fantastic. And so
Yeah.
as beautiful and as interesting as this movie is, it's also so scary. Especially for me, the sound design and that screech. So I've only
Mm,
got time for one last question. So I have to know,
sure.
like, what went into making that screech?
Oh, a lot went into making that screech. Well, I knew I wanted it to have a musical quality. It needed to be like a siren song, right?
Mhm.
Because it's hypnotizing. And I wanted it to live between sort of the diegetic sound design, the sounds in the scenes in the world, and the score, the soundtrack of the movie. And sort of, I wanted to be in between. So at first, I tasked the composer, Simon Vasco, that wrote our music, with um, developing it. And he teamed up with a bunch of people who did like new music, voice acrobatic stuff, and really crazy things came out of it. And then so we slowly found out that it shouldn't be too much of a female voice singing, and it can also not be too much of like an animal screech. We had to find something in the middle that felt like it came out of a body, but also had like an ethereal quality. And honestly, that work really came from inception of the idea, all the way through mixing the movie and making it, sometimes ethereal, where it's like everywhere. You're sitting in the cinema and you're like really in it, in that haze of that sound, right? And then in other moments, it's like being produced from, as we see in a close up there, right? And like we see like the vocal cords flutter of the person producing it. So that was a challenge, but I'm happy with where we ended up. Yeah.
Oh, it's so incredible and so terrifying, and just like it lives in my brain. It's so fantastic. But that is the time
I
that I have
love
with
to
you
hear that.
today. Thank you so, so much for talking with me, and congratulations on such an awesome movie.
Thank you so much. I appreciate this.
Okay, and then BJ, you also had the opportunity to talk to Hunter Schafer and Dan Stevens together. Anything we need to know about this conversation before we jump into it?
Like my conversation with Gina Gershon, this is yet another example of Everyone, please clap at how professional I am of not geeking out over the two of them because I love them so much and I held it together like a champ. No, the only thing you need to know is the two of them were so beyond lovely and we had a very good time. This one does not have any spoilers in it. It is a conversation about, their approaches to the character. And I also drew a parallel between like I guess thematic parallel, not like character parallel, between Cuckoo and The Guest, which I think people may enjoy.
The two of you have both appeared in films and shows that span the spectrum in terms of genre, particularly heightened genres like sci-fi and horror. So my question for the two of you is that a deliberate choice for you? And if so, what is it about these specific genres that speak to you? Hunter, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's deliberate. Uh, Everything that I'm like getting excited about doing is really truly just like a from a natural reaction standpoint. But there is a trend within those natural reactions. And I've always loved sci-fi. And I have a feeling it's gonna stay that way. It's sci-fi thrillers. This movie fits right into that. It's right up my alley. So yeah.
Beautiful. And Dan, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, particularly with horror, I love the way that it kind of connects with audiences. You know immediately whether something is working by a sort of audience reaction to a horror film. They often kind of speak to the fears of our age, which I love. That there's often a little kind of subtle thread of social commentary going on behind it, and it's also kind of breeding ground, to borrow a Cuckoo kind of phrase, for a lot of our best filmmakers. You know, a lot of our like most prominent filmmakers started out in horror. And it's just a great kind of training ground for those tricks and tools of a filmmaker, and really get to kind of see great, very inventive filmmaking brains at work in the kind of more lo-fi, independent horror space.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more. And Hunter, up until this point, many of the projects that audiences most likely know you from are, generally speaking, these very gripping ensemble pieces, with the exception of Fuck Anyone Who's Mob, which is a truly phenomenal leading performance, one that you not only co-wrote, but is a relatively contained piece. Meanwhile, you're in like every scene of Cuckoo, and this is an incredibly physically demanding role for you. So,
Mm.
how did your preparation for the film differ than your previous projects, or did it not?
Yeah. So well, they haven't come out in this order, but this was my first movie I ever filmed. Um yeah, I auditioned for this role during COVID at the very beginning of COVID. And then I had to go film season 2 of Euphoria afterwards. So it ended up being like almost a 2-year gap between getting the role and then actually shooting the movie. So I had a lot of time to think and get to know Tilman, and practice butterfly knife and learn the bass um uh and I'm really thankful for that time. But I mean, there's only so much sort of prep I think I could have done. It being my first movie and all, like I did feel this sense of like I just need to like dive headfirst into this and see what happens, and that's also kind of what happened. So yeah.
Definitely mission accomplished. And Dan, on the opposite side of this, I say this with all the love in my heart, but thank you for what feels like a continued quest to play as many charming little freaks and weirdos as humanly possible. Um, but I have to say, I was thrilled. I saw this movie at the Overlook Film Festival a few months back, and I lost it when this movie pivots into what is like a hard action movie, because it feels like I'm getting the Guest sequel that I've been waiting for, which was just great. So, what was it like to return to a role that required you to once again stalk and attempt to kill a ridiculously talented blonde woman who's about to become horror's new favorite final girl?
Amazing. Well, first of all, I'm happy to contribute to the freaks and weirdos representation on screen. I think that's very important. And yeah, I love a movie with a good turn where you're in one mode and then it switches into another. The Guest is definitely one of those, and this is, I guess, another one. Where it's you're taking the audience on a real roller coaster just by throwing them from one genre to another. And those are the kind of movies I love watching, and they're great fun to be a part of because there is whatever is going on the screen, underlying it all is a kind of slightly mischievous sense of humor in terms of how playful we're being with our audience. So I love being a part of those projects.
And on the note of playfulness, was it on the page to find as many pronunciations of Gretchen as humanly possible, or was that actor instinct?
That was me being very loyal to the German language. That is the correct pronunciation of that name. Koenig comes from. The Americans insist on pronouncing it a different way, and he's never going to get on board with that. So
incredible. And so, Hunter, this is such a hyper specific journey of weirdness for Gretchen to go on. When was it in reading the script that you had the thought, I have to play this character?
Yeah. I mean, I think what really did it for me was seeing Tillman's first movie, Lose.
Mm-hmm.
Jessica said earlier she like I think she watched Lose first, and before even reading the script she was like, okay, yes, I want in. And I mean, I didn't do it in that order, but I think if I did, I would have had the same reaction because Tillman is just such a unique and exciting director. I was like, I don't care what I would play a tree, I just want to be in the world. But yeah, to be able to play Gretchen was really exciting, and energetically I think it was a nice departure from Jules, who I'd been spending 2 years with before, and kind of still angsty teenage girl, but a different flavor, and a nice entry point into like the movie making world. Yeah.
Beautiful. And so Dan, you have just, going back to your freaks and weirdos, just rogues gallery of characters that you've created. Where does Erich Koenig rank for you in terms of the scale of your weird little freaks that you've played?
I mean, I love all my weird little freaks equally. I couldn't possibly put them in order. But he's definitely up there in terms of how fun they were to play, largely because of the environment that was created. A role can be incredible, and yet the experience of putting it in the story can be difficult, or the people you're working with don't make it as fun or whatever. But with this, it was so fun, and seeing how grounded and real and awesome Hunter's performance was, and to get to kind of bring Koenig into those scenes and just be the freaky little weirdo that he is, playing with that dynamic was a lot of fun. And I think Tilman enjoyed kind of how different our performances were, and how just playing with those contrasts, I think, creates some really fun dynamics.
Fantastic. Yeah, I saw Cuckoo the same weekend that Abigail premiered at Overlook, so it was a nice little bit of tonal whiplash going from each character, and also huge pop in Abigail when she says that your name is Adam Barrett. I was like, that was for us. That was for the hardcore nuts out there.
For sure.
And Hunter, I'm sure, as Dan can attest to this, horror fans are ride or die and will follow you into the dark. So do you have a desire to keep playing within the horror genre? And if so, what horror roles would you like to try?
Oh, totally. Well, you know what? Next time I would love to be like a creature or something. Or like what Caitlin, who played the hooded woman in our movie, was doing. She's a dancer. It looked like so much fun, and I really love anything physical. So maybe to be on the other side of the story, the more antagonistic.
Join the freaky weirdos.
Yeah, join.
Yes.
I want a freaky weirdo now.
Yeah, we need a freaky weirdo party. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you both so much for chatting with me today. You have both been fantastic, and congratulations on what is absolutely one of my favorite movies I've seen this year. Love, love the weirdo stuff. Thanks for making cucks and birds of us all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's going to do it for today's episode of the show. You can find more about all of the stories that we mentioned on today's show at slashfilm.com, linked inside the show notes for this episode. Slash Film Daily is published every weekday, bringing you the most exciting news from the world of movies and TV, as well as deeper dives into the great features you can find on the site. You can subscribe to the show on Apple, Overcast, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Send your feedback, questions, comments, concerns, and mailbag topics to us at bpearson@slashfilm.com. Make sure to leave your name and general geographic location in case we mention your email on the air. Don't forget to take a minute to rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. That really does help us out a lot. Tell your friends about the show any way you can. Thanks so much for listening, and we will talk to you all next week.